My name is Lena Mercer. I'm 34 years old. I never thought the worst humiliation of my life would begin with a champagne toast and end with a photograph of my dead mother in my husband's lap. That was the moment I understood something in my marriage had been rotten long before I ever tasted it. I lived in Cincinnati then, in a narrow brick house with squeaky floors and a front porch swing my mother had painted robin's egg blue before the cancer took her hands and then the rest of her. I worked as a pediatric occupational therapist at Children's West, the kind of job that left glitter in my pockets, crayon marks on my sleeves, and other people's heartbreak sitting heavy in my chest by the time I drove home. From the outside, my life looked stable. Married 6 years, good neighborhood, respectable job, husband from a well-known local family. No kids yet, but people said that with the careful smile they use when they're trying not to ask whether the problem is medical or emotional. The truth was both. My mother, Evelyn, had died 10 months earlier after an ugly, slow illness that stripped her down to bone and sarcasm. In the last 6 weeks, I had slept in a recliner beside her bed, spoon-fed her lemon ice, changed sheets in the dark, and listened to her apologize for dying like she was inconveniencing me. After she passed, I inherited more money than I expected. Not millionaire money, not private jet money. Just enough that people suddenly started using a softer voice around me, like grief came with a credit limit. I put it in a separate account and touched none of it. That money felt hot, haunted. My husband, Cole, called it a blessing. At first, he said it gently. You shouldn't let it just sit there, Len. Then, more often. We could pay off the car. We could finally do the kitchen. My parents are trying to refinance the restaurant. It'd only be temporary. He always said we. He always meant me. Cole's family owned Whitman's, an old-school steakhouse downtown with dark wood walls, framed photos of local athletes, and servers who still called women darlin' if they were over 50, and sweetheart if they were under. His father, Roy, carried himself like the mayor of every room. His mother, Denise, wore pearls to lunch and meanness like perfume. Never enough to choke you immediately, just enough to linger on your skin after she hugged you. By December, I'd started noticing little things. Cole forgetting his wallet. Denise making jokes about me being the rich widow without the widow part. Roy telling people in front of me that family takes care of family, the same way a man says grace before asking you to finance his mistakes. I told myself grief was making me suspicious. Then New Year's Eve came. Whitman's was packed that night, all brass light and candle glow and the clatter of expensive glasses. Cole had insisted we celebrate there with his parents, his younger sister Trina and her husband, and Roy's brother Neil with his grown sons. 9 of us at a long corner table near the back, where the waiters would fuss and the owner's family could be loud without strangers staring too long. I wore black because it was easy, and because my mother used to say black made women look like they had secrets worth keeping. The dinner started fine enough. Steaks, bourbon, the usual old stories about college football and business, and who had put on weight since Thanksgiving. I smiled when expected. I answered when spoken to. I ignored the way Cole kept brushing my knee under the table like he was trying to soothe a horse before loading it into a trailer. Then the check never came. Instead, after dessert, Roy lifted his glass and smiled at me. Well, he said, to new beginnings. And to Lena, who came into a little miracle this year. The table turned toward me in a soft wave of expectation. My stomach tightened. Denise laughed first. Come on, don't look so nervous. We're family. Roy just means it's a blessing when good fortune lands on the right branch of the tree. Cole smiled at me, but there was tension in it. He reached beside his chair and pulled up a slim leather folder. I wanted to wait until after dinner, he said quietly, just so we could talk calmly. He slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. I looked at him. What is this? Just paperwork, Roy said. Bridge money, short term. Keeps the restaurant safe while the bank finishes its review. Trina chimed in with a bright little laugh. You were going to pick up tonight anyway, right? It's New Year's. Might as well make it official. Something in the room changed then. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was choreography. Everybody knew the next step but me. I opened the folder. On top was a typed agreement. It said I was to lend Whitman Hospitality Group $200,000. Interest deferred for 18 months. Beneath that were projections, debt summaries, vendor balances, and a handwritten note in Cole's blocky script. We'll talk about moving the rest later. Later. The rest. My fingers went cold. Then, as I lifted the papers, something slipped loose and fell into my lap. A photograph. Small, glossy, old enough that the edges had yellowed. It showed a much younger Roy Whitman, standing outside what looked like the original Whitman's location, back when it was a diner. Beside him was my mother. Not just standing near him, sitting on the hood of a car, smiling up at him with the kind of open, unguarded joy I had seen only in one or two surviving photos from her 20s. Roy was younger too, leaner, without the heavy jaw of age, and he had one hand braced behind her like he belonged there. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, were 6 words, "For the day somebody finally lies." I stared at it so long the room blurred. "Lena?" Cole said. No one else had seen the back. No one knew what had just detonated inside me. I put the photo back into the folder. Then I lifted my purse, pulled out my card, and flagged down the nearest server. He leaned in. "Yes, ma'am?" "I'd like to pay for my meal," I said. The table went still. Denise let out a laugh like she thought I was being cute. "Oh, honey, don't be dramatic." "Just mine," I repeated. The poor man looked to Roy, then to me, then nodded and backed away. Cole's voice dropped. "Lena, not here." I signed the slip when it came. My hand was steady. That scared me more than if I'd been shaking. Then I stood, picked up the folder, and put on my coat. Roy's face hardened. "You don't walk out on family over a conversation." I looked at him then, really looked. At the man in that photograph, at the man who had watched my mother die and never once mentioned he needed the sound of her laughter. "Apparently," I said, "someone already did." Cole stood up so fast his chair scraped. "Lena!" But I was already walking. Behind me, I heard my name in 3 different voices. Cole followed me through the restaurant, through the front doors, into the freezing night where fireworks were already cracking over the river. "Stop!" he shouted. "Would you just stop for 1 second?" I turned at the curb. His cheeks were red from wine and anger. "You are embarrassing me." I laughed then, one awful broken sound. "That makes 2 of us." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. What was that picture doing in the folder? His face changed. Not confusion, recognition, then caution. "It doesn't mean what you think." "You don't even know what I think." "Lena, get in the car." "No. Don't do this out here." "Then tell me now. How did your father know my mother?" Cole rubbed both hands over his face. "It's old history." "That's not an answer." He looked back toward the restaurant windows like maybe help might come marching through them. "My dad knew a lot of people." I stared at him, and slowly, horribly, I understood. He had seen the picture before. I got in my car and drove home alone while the sky over Cincinnati kept exploding in celebration. Cole came in at 2:47 a.m. I know because I was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with the photograph laid flat under the pendant light, and I had been staring at the timestamp on the microwave for almost an hour. He smelled like whiskey and cold air and his mother's perfume. "You really did it," he said, tossing his keys onto the counter. "You left me there to clean up your little scene." I looked at him. "My scene?" He braced both palms on the island. "Do you know what that cost my family tonight?" I almost smiled. The nerve of him was so pure it had become art. What did that photograph cost my mother? His jaw flexed. I told you, it's old history. Did you marry me knowing who she was? He didn't answer fast enough. That silence split my life in half. I stood up so quickly my chair tipped backward. Did you? Not at first. Everything in me went cold. He shut his eyes for a second, like he regretted saying it that plainly. I didn't know until after we were engaged. And then? He swallowed. My mom recognized your last name, then the resemblance. I heard myself breathe. What did she say? That your mother used to work with my dad, that there was bad blood, that it was complicated. Complicated? My voice cracked. Is that what you call slipping her picture into a loan packet and trying to shake down her daughter at dinner? It was an accident. The photo shouldn't have been there. But it was. I took a step toward him. And you knew. All these years you knew my mother had some kind of history with your family, and you said nothing. I was trying to protect you. I slapped the folder so hard the papers fanned across the table. From what? He shouted back then, maybe because he had nowhere else to go. From learning your sainted mother wasn't the victim you think she was. The house went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator motor kick on. Cole looked like he wanted to take it back immediately, but I was already beyond hurt. Hurt was behind me. I was in the bright, clean place where rage lives. Get out, I said. Lena, get out. He laughed once, unbelieving. This is my house. No, my mother's money paid off your half of it last spring, remember? Get out. He opened his mouth again, saw something in my face, and stopped. 10 minutes later, I heard the front door slam. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I called in sick for the first time in 2 years. Then I drove to the storage unit where I'd kept my mother's things, because I still couldn't bear having all of them in the house. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor between boxes labeled linens and medical bills and Christmas, and I searched for any trace of Whitman. I found 3 things. A recipe card for bourbon-glazed carrots with the name Roy scrawled in the corner like a note to self. A payroll envelope from 1989 with the return address Whitman's Family Diner. And a letter my mother had never mailed. It was addressed to a woman named June Holloway. The paper was folded twice and stained along one edge, but my mother's handwriting was unmistakable. June, if he tells you I stole from him, don't believe it. He knows what he promised me. He knows what was mine before Denise put on that ring and decided I was trash that needed sweeping out. I'm done fighting people who own the judge, the bank, and half this city. I'm keeping the one thing they can't touch. E. No explanation. No names beyond that. No comfort. Just a wound with no bandage. By noon, I was sitting in my car outside a row house in Norwood, because the return address on the envelope had led me to an old tenant registry, and the registry had led me to a number, and the number belonged to a woman who said June Holloway had died years ago, but her sister Alma still lived on Maple. Alma was 80 if she was a day, with silver hair pinned up like she still had somewhere formal to be, and a cigarette voice that made every sentence sound like gossip and scripture at once. When I showed her the photograph, she went still. Well, she said softly, would you look at that? Evelyn Mercer. You knew her? Alma stepped back from the door. Come in before the whole neighborhood knows your business. Her living room smelled like coffee and dust and old roses. I sat on the edge of a floral couch while she studied me with sharp blue eyes. You got her mouth, she said. But his stubbornness. His? Roy's. I felt my spine stiffen. I'm not his daughter. She waved one hand. Didn't say you were. Said you got his stubbornness. Lord, don't jump ahead. Then she told me a story no one in my life had ever even hinted at. Before Whitman's became the steakhouse people bragged about taking clients to, It had been a diner on the west side. My mother, Evelyn, had built half of it from nothing: menus, suppliers, books, recipes, payroll when Roy was too busy charming investors and city inspectors. According to Alma, everybody knew Evelyn was the real spine of the place. Then Roy got engaged to Denise Caldwell, daughter of a local businessman with real money and better connections. Denise didn't like there being another woman in any room that involved Roy, even if that woman was doing the actual work. "The day Denise came in wearing that diamond," Alma said, stirring powdered creamer into her coffee, "she looked at your mother like she was something on the heel of her shoe." What happened? What always happens when power marries insecurity. Denise started whispering. Roy started retreating. Money got tight. Then one day, cash disappeared from the office, and suddenly your mother was the problem. "You're saying they framed her?" Alma gave me a sad look. "I'm saying nobody looked too hard when Roy said he'd handled it privately." My chest hurt. Why wouldn't my mother ever tell me this? "Because shame is a quieter disease than cancer," Alma said. "And because she was pregnant." I stared at her. Alma set down her mug carefully. "Not with Roy's child," she said before I could even form the fear. "With yours. Different man. Sweet mechanic named David Mercer. Died before you were born. Drunk driver on I-75. Evelyn had nowhere to go, no husband, no leverage, and a belly starting to show. Roy offered her money to sign away her claim to the diner and disappear. Denise made sure the word thief followed her to every place she tried to work." My hands were shaking now. "She never got anything?" "Oh, she got one thing." Alma nodded toward the photograph in my lap. "The land." "The land?" "The diner sat on 2 parcels. Roy thought he had both. He didn't. Your mother's uncle had helped with 1 down payment years before, and that piece stayed tied to her through a messy deed nobody noticed until lawyers got involved. Roy couldn't take it clean, so he built around the problem and spent the next 30 years pretending it didn't exist." A hard, strange silence filled the room. Then, all at once, the past snapped into focus. The inheritance, the pressure, the folder, the desperation in Roy's face. "They're not trying to borrow money from me," I whispered. Alma gave a slow nod. "They're trying to get you to hand back something they were never able to steal from her." I don't remember driving home. I remember sitting in my parked car outside my house with both hands on the steering wheel, crying so hard my ribs hurt. Not graceful tears, not cinematic tears, the kind that drag ugly sounds out of you. I cried for my mother working double shifts while people in town called her dishonest. I cried because I had spent 10 months trying to honor her memory while sleeping beside a man who knew some part of this and let his family circle me anyway. I cried because grief had apparently not finished with me. It had only changed clothes. Cole called 6 times, Denise twice, Roy once. I answered none of them. That evening, Roy showed up in person. He was standing on my porch when I opened the door, expensive coat buttoned to the throat, hands tucked in the pockets like he was dropping by to discuss weather. "I think we should talk privately," he said. "We are private." He glanced past me into the house. "Is Cole here?" "No." A faint irritation flickered across his face, like I had failed to stage the room correctly. "Lena, there are details here you don't understand." "I understand enough. My mother helped build your first restaurant. Then your wife destroyed her name and you let it happen." He held my gaze. "Your mother was paid." "For her land?" "For a settlement." "Then why did your family need me to sign loan documents?" His eyes narrowed. There it was. Truth, peeking through the mask. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me so he couldn't pretend this was still polite. "She kept the parcel, didn't she?" I said. "And the current building sits partly on it." Roy said nothing. I want to hear you say it. His mouth tightened. Your mother was stubborn. I laughed through my tears. That must be where I get it. He dropped his voice. Listen to me carefully. The restaurant is failing. If this turns public, banks pull away, buyers disappear, employees lose jobs, and your husband's family is ruined. My husband's family ruined itself. Cole loves you. The words hit me like an insult. Did you? I asked him. Did you love her? Something moved in his face then. Not enough to redeem him, just enough to prove he was still human under the rot. Once, he said quietly. And when your wife accused her? She wasn't blameless. That answer did it. Something final. You need to leave. He shook his head. You don't want a legal fight. No, I said. You just never thought I'd survive one. He stepped closer. If you do this, there will be things said about your mother you won't like hearing. I opened the door. There already were, I said. That's the whole point. The next 2 weeks shattered everything. I hired an attorney, a real one, mean in the clean, elegant way that wealthy men fear. We dug through county property records, corporate filings, archived permits, and settlement fragments. Every ugly story Alma told had bones in public record. Not enough to restore my mother's reputation in a courtroom by itself, but enough to prove one critical fact. Whitman's flagship building occupied land tied to my mother's estate through an unresolved ownership interest that had never been legally extinguished. Roy had spent decades betting no one would look. Cole moved into a condo his parents paid for. He texted apologies that all had the same shape. I never meant for it to happen like this. I love you. Please let me explain. Nothing about what he should have done 6 years earlier. Nothing about why he stayed silent while they sharpened me into an opportunity. I finally agreed to meet him at a park near the river on a gray January afternoon. He looked older, not wiser, just more collapsed. I know I failed you, he said as soon as I sat down on the cold bench, but I didn't marry you for this. Maybe not, I said, but you stayed for it. He flinched. He tried to tell me he thought the land issue had been settled long ago, that his mother kept saying my mother had exaggerated everything, that by the time he understood how desperate the business really was, he was trapped between loyalty and fear. I was trying to fix it quietly, he said. No, I said. You were trying to keep me calm while everyone else reached into my pockets. He looked down at his hands. That's fair. I stared at the river because looking at him too long made me hate the version of myself who had once felt safe beside him. Then he said, There's one more thing you don't know. My body went rigid. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small brass key. My dad kept a storage room above the original diner site before it was demolished. He moved boxes out years ago into a warehouse unit. My mom didn't know he still had it. He placed the key on the bench between us. I found ledgers, photos, old correspondence. I think he kept more than he admitted, maybe because he couldn't throw her away completely. I didn't touch the key. Why are you giving me this? His eyes filled. Because if there's any decent part of me left, it should have started with the truth. I took the key. That night, alone in the warehouse unit, I opened damp boxes full of invoices, menus, holiday decorations, cracked platters, and decades of Whitman family lies. At the bottom of one metal file cabinet, inside a ledger sleeve, I found the thing that broke me all over again. A sealed envelope in my mother's handwriting. Lena, if you're reading this, then either Roy grew a conscience too late, or life finally cornered the truth. I didn't tell you because I wanted at least one part of your life unpoisoned by what happened to me. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe silence is how families teach pain to survive. If so, I'm sorry. Inside was a single-page statement signed by Roy, never filed, acknowledging Evelyn Mercer's ownership interest in the land and promising full repayment when conditions permit. Below it, in different ink, my mother had written, "He never meant to honor this. But one day his family will come looking for what they think is theirs. When they do, make them say my name." I sat on the concrete floor and sobbed, with the letter pressed to my mouth. That was the collapse. Not the restaurant, not the marriage. Me. All the months since my mother's death, I had been trying so hard to be composed, efficient, mature, grateful. The kind of woman who handled loss with folded laundry and responsible banking decisions. But on that warehouse floor, I was just a daughter who understood too late how much had been stolen from the woman who raised her. I screamed once, loud enough it echoed. Then I got up. By March, Whitman's was negotiating from weakness. Roy's buyers backed away. The bank froze a restructuring deal. Denise stopped calling because finally, for once in her life, charm had nowhere to land. We settled before trial. I could have gone for blood. Some days I wanted to. But revenge in real life is paperwork, percentages, signatures, and watching powerful people agree to terms they once would have laughed at. The settlement included a public statement acknowledging my mother, Evelyn Mercer, as an original founding partner in the business. It included a financial payout far larger than the bridge loan they had tried to squeeze from me. And it required Whitman Hospitality to remove Roy's name from the private dining room and rename it the Mercer Room for 10 years. Denise cried when she signed. I watched without blinking. Cole signed the divorce papers a week later. No dramatic courtroom scene, no screaming in the hallway, just the end of a life I had mistaken for love, because I was lonely and he was available, and sometimes that's how women talk themselves into cages. In June, I used part of the settlement and part of my mother's inheritance to lease a modest corner space in Over the Rhine. Not a steakhouse, not a shrine. A neighborhood supper cafe with blue porch swing paint on the trim and my mother's handwritten recipes framed near the register. I named it Evelyn's Table. On opening night, the room was warm and loud and alive in a way I hadn't realized I still craved. Kids smudged fingerprints on the glass. An exhausted nurse ordered pie to go. 2 construction workers argued about baseball over pot roast. Alma came in wearing lipstick and declared the carrots almost right, which from her counted as a blessing. Near closing, the bell over the door rang and Denise Whitman stepped inside. The whole room seemed to inhale. She looked smaller without the armor of her dining room and her husband's money. Older, too. Human, unfortunately. "I won't stay," she said. I kept wiping down the counter. That would be my preference. She nodded like she deserved that. Maybe for the first time, she knew she did. From her purse, she took out a stained index card and set it on the counter between us. My mother's handwriting. A pie recipe. "She left this at the old diner," Denise said quietly. "I kept it because I was petty and 28 and wanted to believe taking little things meant I'd won something." I said nothing. Her mouth trembled once before she steadied it. "I didn't come to apologize for all of it. There isn't enough life left in me for that. I came to say your mother was better than I allowed her to be. And you are more like her than any of us deserved." Then she turned and left before I could answer. I stood there for a long time with the recipe card in my hands. Outside, summer light was fading gold over the street. Inside, the dishwashers rattled, and somebody laughed too loud from the back, and the espresso machine hissed like a tired old cat. For the first time since my mother died, the ache in me didn't feel like a grave. I slipped the key into my apron pocket and hid the note. Cole's words echoed in my head. Another secret box, the truth about my mother, and a warning not to let his father reach it first. I wiped my tears, returned to the dining room, and kept serving like nothing had changed.